Hi, David. Can't hear you.
So.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Joe.
How are y'all? Well, time to shut off Slack because it's going to go off the entire time.
Hello, sorry, I'm having some issue. I was having some issues over on my end, but it's all set now.
Right. Hopefully some more people will show up. How's everyone doing?
Good. It's been like a crazy week, but it's good. Yeah. Very, very busy, but altogether good. It could be worse. Could be the opposite of busy, and then we wouldn't be having a good time.
Yes, our life is very relaxed, but our moving truck still hasn't showed up.
Wait,
It's
you
been like
still
30
have your stuff? Didn't you get there like 2 weeks ago?
Got there on September 15th.
Oh my God. I mean, the same thing happened to my Nana. She moved across country and they didn't have enough drivers. She didn't get her stuff for like 2.5 months. Not to freak you out.
No, but if it doesn't happen, I'm just like gonna be like, fuck, come on, people.
Yeah.
Like, tell me where it is. I will go drive a U-Haul and get it. This
Did
point,
they
it's like,
explain why the delay is happening?
no.
I bet it might be that driver thing. Like, yeah, like her stuff was just kind of stuck there because they couldn't find anyone to drive it across country.
We'll just
But besides
tell
not
us.
having any of your personal belongings, how are you settling in?
Yeah, that we're not. And some of it is just like it's getting, I'm on the East Coast now, so it's getting colder. And it's like, we need our coats. We need things other than flip-flops. It's like, it's like, so we're kind of getting them out of like, what do we have to go buy coats for everybody and winter gear and
It's gonna show up like the day after you do it.
yeah, that's kind of like the whole thing. It's like we'll go buy new stuff and sort of guarantees it. It's like, want to make sure your umbrellas show up? Like, go buy some new umbrellas for everybody.
Hey, James.
Hey there, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, I'm a little bit of a chaotic morning, more than expected. That's why I'm coming to you from my minivan, so I apologize about that, but what can I say? That's the life of having kids sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Good to see you. Oh, we got others too. Maybe I'm just not seeing it with my, oh, there we go. All right. Oh, Joe, you got a whiteboard behind you now. Maybe you can't hear me? Ben, can you hear me? Oh, now you can hear me. Okay, cool. All right. Awesome. We got some great people. So apologies for some of the technical, some of the logistics challenges that I'm running into this morning with young kids. Joe, I'm wondering if you can help kick things off for us. Thank you, my friend.
I can do that.
And maybe for some of the new folks that we have joining, when your turn comes around, if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be awesome. People to get to know each other. So cool. I'll let you take it away, man. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the hot seat. I'm going to explain what a hot seat is and how it works. So a hot seat is a feedback session that is very, very focused and designed to give feedback on a very specific question per person. So Eden is going to be in the hot seat today. So the way this works is everybody here that is the other side of the hot seat, people are giving feedback, please raise your hand. Ben, Pam, Clark, Olivia. Okay, so the way this works is we'll go around the room. The person in the hot seat poses a question. Then we go around the room and everyone that's giving feedback gives direct feedback to the question with no interruptions and no interjections or response from the person that hasn't been asking the question. And we go around the room for one round of feedback, and then it goes back to the person in the hot seat, and the person in the hot seat gets to ask one person a series of questions. So then the person in the hot seat, it's a directed feedback session, not an open discussion. Then once you've asked all the questions, person in the hot seat, then it goes to open discussion. The one thing we have to do is pay attention to the last, say, 10 minutes of the conversation to help bring everything around to create some sort of summation or action for you, and for you to kind of clarify, this is what I think I got out of this. Does everyone agree? Any more comments? Okay, with that being said, when we go around the room, intro yourself, as there's a very limited amount of time. You want to make this fast. Keep the intro to like short, 30 seconds. Don't need a biography, just enough for the person to understand the context of how your sort of where your feedback is coming from. Okay, so is everyone prepared?
Ready.
Yep. So, and who here again, raise your hand again if you're going to be someone that's in the hot seat giving feedback so I can see you. Ben, Sam, yes. Olivia, Kevin. Kate, are you going to, or are you just going to lurk? She's going to lurk. And James, okay. So we got everyone. This is good. So ready, Eden?
I'm ready. Thank you guys.
So this is the point. Ask the question.
Thank you guys for having me. So I'm Chief of Staff at EcoMap Technologies, and my question is, if you guys could, do a fellowship that gave $60,000 to an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder, how would you set up that program?
And that's the question. Ben, Ben, you're the first responder. Go.
Okay, so hi, it's Eden, is it?
Yeah, like the garden.
Okay, hi Eden. So my name's Ben. I'm based in Leicester in the United Kingdom, and I started and I'm still very much involved in our local startup scene here. And you're asking the question, what would I do with $60,000 to get your startup scene off the ground? I think that's a correct way of expressing it.
No, not to get a startup. Like to build a program that helps an ecosystem builder. So it's like, what would your program be? Like, what would you have to do to 60K? Like, how would you build that?
Okay.
I'm gonna frame this a little bit. I'm gonna frame this a little bit more because I have a little more information. So EcoMap Technologies is going to be taking 60K and investing it with an ecosystem builder. And they're trying to figure out what is the best way to do that. And the intent, I believe, is to sort of make this a program, like a pilot program. So this.
I'm getting somebody's radio on interference.
Yeah, somebody's radio's on.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to try and answer, but maybe I'm not entirely sure what this means, but by far and away, the most amazing thing we ever did in our community is to run an accelerator program for local businesses. There are people here who know all about that, so I'm sure there'll be loads of good details on that. But getting people to roll up their sleeves and help each other out, get people who've already done it to help people who are just starting out, that's what I would spend any program money on. It's got to be grassroots, real help. Avoid anything that's just sort of posing or posturing, awards, dinners, meals, all that kind of stuff. You can do that if you like, but the most important thing is to get people actually helping each other, and you'll be amazed how much help you do get from people who have already done it. And as I said, to me, an accelerator is the most obvious thing, but there's probably other ways you could do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to go next. The challenge of picking how to fund an ecosystem builder. I will separate this out, and there are two types of ecosystem builders that I've seen in the wild. There are ecosystem builders and there are ecosystem builders. And the ecosystem builders are the ones that are focused on growing their platform as a startup helper. And it's a lot of hand wavy, a lot of jazz hands, a lot of show, not a lot of go. So I would find a way, to the extent possible, you could find someone who does a lot of go, a lot of super connecting in the community. Our community survived on super connectors, basically intros. So find one of those people in the community and sort of anoint them to be the super connector. I would also say that it's very, very important, if they aspire to be a super connector, to connect them to other super connectors outside of their community. It's sort of beyond the money that's going to allow them to do the work. Find a way to connect them to other people that will allow them to be better at what they do, so they don't just end up being sort of in a little bubble inside their town. The communities that probably need it the most are sort of at inflection points. Ones that are just starting out, or ones that are experiencing a transition. And so this might be, they're ready to graduate from the early stage to the next stage. And at all these points, there's a need for some capital to sort of kick off the next thing. There's probably some programs that are status quo that are going along that are still working, but there really is a need to sort of push it to the next level. So I'd prioritize looking for someone in a community that's ready to do a new thing. I think if you're just supporting an ecosystem builder that's going to continue to do whatever they've been doing for a number of years, what you're going to do is just perpetuate. I mean, it's 60K, you're going to keep them alive for another year, but it's just going to perpetuate the status quo for a year, and next year they're going to need more. So I would look for that, the key point where you can actually really help someone to launch the next thing. And they might not have an idea what that is. They might just be able to say, yeah, we've hit a wall, we've grown as much as we can go without whatever's next, and we don't know what that is, but we know that we've plateaued. That's my commentary. Seek them out. I would actually say stay away, find a second tier city or third tier city, stay away from a big metro. That's my commentary. And James, you're on.
All right, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for any wind noise or something from the car. So I just feel like there's a million different sort of tangents that I could take with it, each of which could run for forever. So I'll try to concentrate on what I think is the most important factor is talent of this person. I agree with Joe. I wouldn't look at an existing program or anything like that. Likewise, I would stay away from anybody that is a background from like economic development or something of that nature. Anyone who's used to running just programs, I don't think that's really the job description. In my humble opinion, it's as Joe said, I think it's sort of the super connector. Someone who is, coming from more of an entrepreneurial background to that what they want to do.
James, we're getting some sound issues. James, we're getting sound issues. So we'll come back to you, okay?
Future, maybe at some point jump off the ecosystem, but again, not really now. Am I better now? Hello?
No, you're breaking up. I'm gonna come back to you, but right now you're
Sounds
breaking
good.
up a lot, okay? All right.
Sounds good.
Olivia, you're on.
All right. So for one, I think you already have a leg up if you have a budget for this, which is great, right? Because a lot of us do this kind of like work pro bono. So I think that's you already have an advantage there. I think it depends. I mean, I don't know if you're planning on using this as a budget to hire someone or using this as like a programming. So I think a few other people talked about, like James started to, and I'm sure he could shine more light on like what you should look for if you decide you wanted to use this as like salary towards a person. If you didn't do that, I think you could also look at like a lot of the kind of events and meetups that are already happening in your community and maybe helping support them further to drive, more, I guess, awareness of the types of activities they're doing. I know, for example, like in Buffalo, I mean, it was super cheap, but all they did was they had this thing called Buffalo Open Coffee Club, where you literally just people that were enthusiastic and excited about startups, just like all met at a coffee house, like every like Tuesday or something, and just chatted, right? And it was just so simple, right? And cheap, and everybody paid for their own coffee, and that was it. So just, I think if you have something, you could even like leverage kind of events that are already happening in your space too, and just trying to support them further and bring awareness for them if you decided not to go the hiring route. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Awesome. Sam.
Right. Hi, everyone. So I work with Ben, Leicester, UK, and I'm probably quite close to this because our local economic development agency, let's call it that, funded my post to work at the university. And so I'm trying to think of things that haven't already been said, but the thing that really worked for us, the sustainability piece, was a not-for-profit organisation we set up, deliberately designed to carry on the work of the project. So to Ben's point about putting stuff on, ensure that there's things happening every month at least, and accelerator programs, pitch events, just obviously things designed to sort of bring people out of the woodwork. We also have a help engine. This is a web page where we can facilitate connections. So we've got an anonymous list of folks that are willing to contribute to the building the community. Yeah, I'm not sure what else I can add really. I mean, got some really good points already.
That's it for you, Sam? All right, Kevin. Comments.
Hey, how's it going? So my name is Kevin Siskar. I ran an accelerator in New York City called Founder Institute that was headquartered out of Silicon Valley. I did 160 companies through that, and then I moved upstate, and I now work with 43 North in Buffalo, where we invest $5 million a year into startups locally. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I will agree with what everyone has said so far. There is a lot of bullshit in this space because there's a lot of government money, and a lot of people see that as like free grabs. And because a lot of these people get money from the government, they don't technically raise funds from limited partners. And so they don't have a fiduciary responsibility to return that money. And so they get away with a lot of bullshit and time wasting of the founders. So I agree that there's like 2 phases, right? There's like help the founders first. If that's not happening in the ecosystem, that has to happen. Phase 2, and this is kind of where Buffalo's at, is like, okay, well now we did that for like, almost a decade. We've got a lot of good companies. Now we need to get enough investors to invest. Like we grew an oak tree, ACV Auctions IPO'd, software engineers are quitting, they got rich off stock options, they're starting the next wave of companies, and like more trees are coming off of that. And you need local investors who aren't in real estate, and you got to get them in this mindset. So I think it depends on where whatever ecosystem you're looking at is in its development and maturity. If it's early, figure out how you can help founders. I agree to not just like support an existing program and to do something new and fresh. Otherwise, you'll just get more of the same. But I think something that I would really focus on to add to something some guys haven't said yet is like align everyone with equity, right? Like that's what happens in Silicon Valley. And too often that word just doesn't get thrown out. Like literally give people equity in the companies and the funds, give them check writing ability. So maybe you create like an emerging manager program, but support them in that way where people can align on equity and not just get aligned on like taking a salary from like an ESD or something like that. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope that maybe kind of resonated. Happy to answer any more questions later.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. That concludes first round.
I'm
Keenan,
happy to
now-
jump in.
Oh,
I
go
didn't
ahead.
know
So-
sorry, this is my first session. James invited me, so I didn't know what the format was, but I'm happy to
So-
jump in.
So the format is you respond to the question. Did you catch the question that Eden asked?
I did, yep.
Okay, so you just respond to it and then no response,
yeah.
and then it goes back to her. So go for it, give her feedback.
Cool. Kate Brodock. I am outside of Syracuse, New York. I am CEO of Women 2.0. We do a whole load of stuff globally with women and underrepresented founders. Definitely community oriented. And I've worked with startup communities around the world for about 15 years. We also have a VC fund. So in my, number one, yes on or yes to James's point about government funding, really hard to do stuff. I think for someone to, let's say it's a 12-month program, a couple of things that you want to think about is, first of all, the definition of ecosystem and what it means where you are. Just hearkening on, I think that was that Ben who just spoke before me, just sort of like almost doing an ecosystem audit. Two, absolutely develop a plan for sustainability, because one of the hardest things about community building is that if you don't have a sustainability model, whatever that is, you're just going to be super low resource, tired, doing everything for free, and it's just not going to work. And then from there, I always like to develop, after the sort of status check on the community, is like, who are we serving and who are the players? That could be multi-pronged. And then what is the value that they need out of it? So if this is founders, what is it? Do they have really low capital access? Are they low on education? Like, do they need investment preparedness, et cetera? So figuring out what the value is that you're bringing to them, and then how are you delivering it? And so, beyond the mobilization point, I'm sort of a believer that, like, just having a series of happy hours isn't really gonna cut it. And so really thinking deeply about that, how is it being delivered to the ecosystem in a way that is going to increase and, as you mentioned, build the ecosystem.
Awesome. David, do you want to go,
Joe,
David? Go.
Yeah, can I just jump in? So all the points that I was going to make have actually already been brought up, except for one. So I like to ask 3 questions when it comes to things like this, and it's what, how, and why. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? But then the last question, why, I feel like is most important. So when looking for someone that you're going to hire for this position, whatever your reason for doing this is, whatever your motivation, you want to make sure that the person who you're bringing in knows that motivation, knows the question, knows the answer to that question of why we're doing this. And that way you guys will be working towards a common goal.
All right, Eden. Now you get to ask questions specifically of any particular person, any feedback. Just your turn to dig, and it's a one-on-one, so no one else jumps in. So ask one, have a dialogue with that person. So you're on, Eden.
Let me see. Hold on. Let me look at the names again, because I guess I would like to ask Kate if you could expand a little bit more on like what a plan for sustainability would be for somebody. Like, so let's say, we have people sending in like what they want to do. And a question on there is like, how would you make this sustainable? Like, what are you looking for from somebody who has a sustainability plan? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is a resourcing, and another way you could put it is like, what's your business model? Just doesn't have to be like so aggressive. It's like the community version of your business model. And so, but it doesn't just have to include money. The money side of it could come from, so you basically are saying, I'm giving you, quote, startup funding of 60K. Past that 60K, how are you going to exist? And so that could be a combination of sponsorship, mentorship, In kind is really good too. Like if you have someone with a consistent venue space, volunteers, like that type of thing is how is this existing beyond our 60K input on this? So that's what I sort of mean by a sustainability model. Otherwise, you're going to just crash. That 60K is going to be gone. And then, you're going to be left kind of on fumes, so to speak. And I've been there, and it's not fun and not very effective.
Yeah. That definitely makes sense. Thank you. Joe, can I ask more people, or am I only allowed to ask one person?
One person at a time. We don't want to make it a free-for-all. What we want to is a guided discussion where you're asking them to clarify anything. And then after that, we'll have a free-for-all. So right now, just feel free to dig.
Okay. And then, let's see.
Yeah. Could I ask Kevin? So I really like your point about how the incentives aren't properly aligned when you're dealing with government funding, because the ecosystem builder doesn't have to be returning capital to anybody as you do with an LP structure. But assuming that a lot of the ecosystem builders who would apply to a program such as this are unlikely to have LPs that they would need to report back to, how could we create an incentive model that makes them responsible to producing higher outcomes than they would perhaps under a traditional grant model where there is no incentive to have to return something?
Yeah, so I mean, just write that into it, right? So, then you're a matching program, right? So you're gonna, if they're a first-time investor, what's a meaningful amount? So maybe they can invest 200K to 500K a year to start. It gets bigger, down the road, but it's a small fund, and they write 10K to 25K checks, and it's enough to get them experienced and growing, and you can help support them to think about that in the right way. But you can essentially be a lead for their fundraise for their fund. You can help them set up the legal structure and the LP agreements. Founder Institute's actually starting to do this now. I left there a few years ago, but Adeo just started this thing called VC Lab that is helping people do this. So you could help, and I think it's free. So you could help them get into VC Lab and then seed them with 60K in emerging funds, and help them to make intros to other people who might want to invest in a fund to invest. Because I think the other thing about these emerging ecosystems, to my second point, was you need to educate these people how startups work. I can't tell you how many people I've pitched to invest in startups, and they're like, they invest in real estate, and they're like, so what's my interest rate return next month? And it's like, no, you need to hold this for 8 years, but you might get 2000x, not 2x, right? And so I think there are a lot of people who want exposure to venture capital and startups, but also are just busy. They have family, they have kids, especially outside New York and Silicon Valley, who would actually maybe prefer to invest in a fund. Because something that I've also seen happen is, and this is something I'm really trying to protect against here, is 43 North launched in 2014, I think, and I hear stories from the original managing director where he got everyone excited, and you had a bunch of these real estate guys and girls write 100K checks into pre-seed companies and lost it all, and then they soured on the asset class for the next 6 years and didn't do another deal. So every other founder who started a company over the next 6-8 years struggled to fundraise locally. And so I think if you could really kick the flywheel on the investor ecosystem, that does a service to the founder ecosystem. But again, you need to make sure the founder ecosystem is there, because we did have this fund in Buffalo called Z80 that predated 43 North. And to be honest, they couldn't find enough local companies to invest in back in 2012. Dan Magnuszewski used to run that. He quit that job and started ACV Auctions. So even if there's enough companies, you could see how getting people in that mindset, that got Dan in the mindset. It supported him. It made him close to the players. He quit, started a company, and became $1 billion. So even though it's maybe not directly connected, there are indirect intangibles that you can help seed mentally and psychologically there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, the dog is getting very excited looking out the window.
Keep going, Eden. You get to do this until you're ready for a free for all.
Okay, cool. How would you? Let's see. No, who asked this? Oh, I think this was James. James, can you answer anything?
Yeah, I'm available.
Okay, cool. I wanted to hear a little bit more about like people building outside of their communities. Like how could we be helping people do that? Like getting to that next, or was that James? I forget now. I feel like that was he who was talking. It might have been
Building
James.
outside of your community. What? I'm not sure. Could you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the difference between like somebody who's maybe been an ecosystem builder for a little bit and they've been doing that work inside their community and now they're trying to set up other relationships outside of it. Like what are the next stages for doing that? Like where would our infusing 60K help them, get those other connections?
Oh, okay. Well, so I guess the point I was referring to, I'm not sure if maybe you were thinking of somebody else, but when I was sort of talking about transitioning, I kind of meant more someone, Joe, actually, you have a good story about this where he exited a company and then wanted to focus the next sort of phase of his career in helping the community. And that, someone who's kind of coming from that perspective, frankly, even if it's like a failed startup, would add a lot more as opposed to someone who currently works at the Chamber of Commerce and now they want to do this nonprofit instead or something like that. You know what I mean? And so, and not to suggest that those people are necessarily everywhere, but I bet you that even, I think we were sort of thinking about Baltimore as a area. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm sure there is somebody who fits that profile out there. And they'll just come from a very different perspective on the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So Joe, if we have a question that's not targeted to an individual, that's for the free for all, right?
Yeah, and you can actually say free for all time, and now you can just ask general questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to do free for all time. So just a little bit level set on the program, like we are a tech company that builds platforms for ecosystems. We've done well, and we want to do a program that gives back to ecosystem builders is kind of the level set of what we're doing. And so we're largely looking outside of our own ecosystem. Like we're headquartered in Baltimore. We love it to death. We do a lot of work here, but this isn't meant for an ecosystem that we know. So when we're doing this program, we're dealing with two variables. The first is the ecosystem that we fund, like which ecosystem, which city, state, area is going to be getting the money. And then the second is the individual ecosystem builder. And so a lot of you brought up really great points about how the ecosystem needs to be at the right stage of development in order for this to actually have impact. If it's too early, it's not going to move the needle. If it's too late, it's going to get lost. So how would you all weigh evaluating those two criteria? Would you pick a kick-ass ecosystem builder who has really great plans, even if the ecosystem isn't at the perfect stage of development? Or should we start by narrowing the search to a handful of ecosystems that are at that kind of inflection stage where an individual of sufficient talent plus money could actually make a big impact, if that makes sense?
I would actually focus, look for that inflection point and focus on the earlier. It's focus on someone that has done some work where they're starting to get noticed for the work. In Eugene, it was, we started the work in 2011, and in 2015, we were starting to get noticed for what we were doing. And that's when it would have been really, really valuable. And a point to this is we were able to get a fair amount of funding. I think, totally we were running like $600,000 or $700,000 a year off to several programs. We had multiple co-working spaces, multiple people funded. What happened to us at that point was we actually had a sustainability plan for all the programs that we were delivering. And I was trying to do backflips, trying to carve out like 50, 60, 100K to do other stuff that was, kind of general, I say noisemaker stuff, but it wasn't an accelerator. We had the accelerator covered. We had the pitch everything was covered that was programmatic, but we needed more. And it was just, that was totally unfunded, and it was impossible to shoehorn that into a grant. And we did a whole bunch of crazy stuff Like literally, I wrote my salary into grants to reallocate my salary into a free bucket that wasn't under a grant that we could actually use for general money. And it was a total shell game. It was a total shell game of cash. And that was, we were much more established, but it hurt us not having, like, really, we needed to kind of, in one grant program, we had $200,000 to do this accelerator program, fully funded plus. But we couldn't, we had to, it was a very specific grant that we had to deliver very specifically and couldn't spend outside of it. And I think that those particular sort of corner cases where people have ideas and have already gotten some traction are the ones to really, really focus on, because those there you can make a big, big impact. And I think my experience talking to these people over the last 10 years is those are the people that are starting to get burnt out. Like, if only I had X to do X, or if only this person who's volunteering all the time, if I could actually just pay them to be a full-time super networker, that would really move the needle for our community. And a lot of them just get frustrated and give up because you end up, like me, spending ridiculous amounts of time shell gaming grant buckets in order to make something happen. So that's my thoughts. Free for all, so everyone keep going.
And did you have something to say? I saw your hand a second ago.
Yeah. So if you're asking the question, who do you pick in other communities, I agree with what Joe said about those sorts of people will kind of already have put their hand up a little bit. You'll be able to spot them if you do even a little bit of Googling or dare I say visiting the place in question. Those sorts of people, but they're generally self-appointed. As others like Kevin, I think, have said, they're not the person from the Chamber of Commerce. They're usually entrepreneurs themselves, or at least have been recently. And if they're not, that's problematic. That doesn't mean to say you can't have employed people doing this, but the people leading it have to be entrepreneurs. Otherwise, it's just going through the motions of something. It's not real. And they also have to be people who have some sort of selfish interest in it. I mean, I've been doing this for 8 years in Leicester, and I get a lot of intellectual pleasure from doing it, but the reality is it doesn't directly pay me any money whatsoever. I'm sure, I don't know if Joe's had the same experience, but what I do get out of it is amazing leads for my startup studio business. We take equity in people's companies, so we're not being paid by anybody. We help other people, a small selection of the people we meet, build things. So actually having that selfish interest is partly what's kept me going, why I haven't hit the wall and got totally frustrated. Yes, because I actually get something tangible out of it other than the fun of doing it. So finding people who've got a good vested interest in community building is good. Otherwise, they don't tend to stick around. They throw in the towel early. They're not being paid. They have to get a full-time job, and they haven't got time for it anymore. That kind of stuff. And it's a bit of a weird. It's a very weird. A self-appointed person who's got a selfish interest in something, and can find the time to sort of shave off a bit of their own time. That's an unusual person. And that's why you don't get ecosystems popping up every single day. You could wait for 20 years in a particular city, even with all the right raw materials there, until the right person who's got all of the sort of things aligned pops up and actually starts saying, yeah, we're going to do this. And in some cities, it just doesn't happen. And maybe you just have to wait.
That's a great point, and I'll double down on what Ben said. If you don't give people that equity, they burn out 100%. And I've seen it now, or even some of the early people, who I guess you would call it the OGs. Like, you ask them to do stuff, and you know that they know more than a lot of the new people because they've been doing it for so long, but they just don't want to help because they're burned out. And that's huge. Giving them that equity incentive and that alignment, right? So, and then a super simple answer to your question is, like, what do you look for? With Founder Institute, we scaled that thing to 200 cities around the world. And, we basically just looked, and this doesn't work for my own city now, but 1 million to 2 million people, like just population, right? You get to that threshold of people and you tend to, have that working. Now, there is like also something I would say too, where like, I feel like, okay, well, a few years ago, I started this thing called the Innovation Collective with a few other friends in New York who ran accelerators. It's a nonprofit. And it kind of happened accidentally. So Shayna Dressler got hired by Google to run 30 weeks program called 30 Weeks Accelerator, and just had everyone over for wine one Friday, and 5 people one month became 20 the next and 40 the next. You know, by the summer there was 100 people there, and we're like, oh shit, like maybe we should incorporate this. So we created a nonprofit, and basically New York City went from 8 accelerators in 2008 to 140 today. And so a lot of people were having the same problem. A lot of people didn't know, how do I prevent mentor fatigue and people burning out and all of that. And so what we kind of saw is like, there's like a flipping that happens in those ecosystems, right? So at those early stages, it's like it's like pack animals fighting over scraps. And there's a little bit of government money, and like everyone's fighting for the startups, and people are like jockeying for titles and positions. But like at the end of the day, none of that shit matters. What matters is like, you're on a cap table, and that cap table goes to $1 billion.
Kevin vanished. He froze.
He got to the good bit though.
Awesome.
Yeah,
host
$1
of
billion.
freestyle,
And then they start getting trouble, and they realize, oh
Inspired
shit, like I should be,
that.
You
I
froze
should
for
be,
a second, Kevin.
I should be collaborating, and that's the only way that this is going to work. And so that's what I would, look for ecosystems where people are like really excited to collaborate, versus maybe those earlier stages where they're more likely to put a knife in each other's back to get some government grant or something like that.
And I'm going to be slightly contrarian about this. So I'll just give you my sort of thing, because my town was smaller, it wasn't big. And we were trying to make a vibrant economy here. And people kept coming back to me and said, what's the sustainable business model? And I said, for this town or for me? And they're like, well, for this town and for you. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do with this town? If you want to create innovation, you want to give access to startups, you want to work on issues of equity, if that's what you want, you've got to figure out a way to fund it. And they're like, and then they're like, what are your seller expectations? Like, if you want me to find my own sustainable business model, that's fairly easy for me to do. And now that I'm like no longer in Eugene and I'm doing this, it's like, I'm doing fairly well right now. Like the consulting offers are coming in. I'll say I'm now soon to be making 8 times what I was back in the day. So there's this tension there between people who want to serve the communities and want to work with startups. And when you're challenged with make a sustainable model, it's like, meet me halfway. I can make a sustainable model personally, but I focus on what I have to do. And that ends up being something that doesn't address anybody else's issues. I end up working, like I'm going to be working with a very, 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 very select group of startups now, unfortunately. It's going to be awesome for me. It's going to pay me very, very well, but it's going to be a very, very, very narrow select group of startups. And it's not going to be geographically bound anymore. And so I think there's this challenge when you're looking at how do you support an ecosystem builder, particularly when we're talking about sustainability. You put them in a situation where it's bound to create burnout, because you're trying, what we're trying to do is sort of move a little bit of Silicon Valley or NYC or Boston to other places that are not those things, and give access and opportunity to people who normally haven't gotten these things. And that's it's super challenging, and then so 60K is awesome, because it's like, to me, that would have helped me for the number of years that I was just volunteering, would have kept me from paying for all the work that I was doing out of pocket. And all the work I was doing out of pocket literally was just 40 hours a week, meeting with people with coffee all the time. Pretty much became a full-time volunteer, and finding a way just where I wasn't self-funding that out of my pocket. Find someone like that. And I always look for people like, to Ben's point, people are already doing this. Rick Terozzi in Portland has been doing this for 15 years, many versions of Pi. Mitch has got the right attitude, with Built Oregon. He's been doing this for a decade. There's some people that are in it for all the right reasons. Stephen Green in Portland. These are all people that I know personally from Oregon, but there's a whole bunch of people that do this work very, very specifically because they see the problem. And the challenge really becomes, the sustainability issue is the one that always gets me, because it's like, it's really easy to make a sustainable program if you're lazy. So make an accelerator program, apply to the local government agency, the grants will come. Form on the grant, lather, rinse, repeat, settle in. And that rarely moves the needle. And what it does is it moves the needle, and Ben and Sam are going through this a little bit. It moves the needle for a fair amount of time, but very, very quickly that program need like the next thing needs to evolve, and you guys are going through that right now, where it's like the next evolution is coming along, and you need to prepare for that. And the government types are just like, why can't you just keep doing what you're doing? We'll just keep paying you to kind of continue the same thing year after year. And that's always what I've seen with these ecosystems, is that something starts, once it gets any traction, it needs to change, and the people that are doing it are frustrated because they get locked into like their own success metric, which is like, what you're doing is working, just keep doing exactly that. You know,
I have a suggestion about the practicality. I wonder if rather than 60K over 1 year, could you find someone for 30K over 2 years, just to spread it out? Like, the year will fly by. If they get towards the end of that year, they might start thinking, well, we haven't got any further money coming in, I need to go somewhere else. So just a suggestion. I know the project that we have coming for was 2.5 years, and yeah, it's only in the final sort of fifth or quarter that you really get that flywheel turning, and you know, you can build the sustainability model.
What is your goal, right? So whether it's 30K for 2 years or 60K for 1 year, like it's 5 years from now, and you're happy that what happened?
For us at EcoMap?
Yep.
Well, to be honest, I just got one of the things, like as a female tech founder, one thing that always made me mad was that when we talk about supporting female Black, brown founders, we're like, oh, here are a bunch of programs that you can go to instead of just funding them. And I saw the same thing playing out with ecosystems, where whenever people talk about supporting ecosystem builders, they're like, oh, here's all these different programs you can go through, instead of just giving them the money to do the work. So this is very much just us wanting, if we are going to be a company who profits off of, like, who has made money in this space, we want to give back in a way that isn't going to just perpetuate a lot of the same issues that we see, which is asking ecosystem builders to jump through a lot of hoops to meet requirements to get funding for their work. And so, I mean, my definition of success here would be, can we get other organizations who also have found a way to make money within the ecosystem realm to put their money where their mouth is as well, and fund more ecosystem builders? That's really our goal here, is like to give back, but to give back in a way that's not the same bullshit as before, you know, as you guys have all experienced, where you have to write a bunch of grants with a bunch of really strict requirements, and then you can't even use that money in the way that is both beneficial because it doesn't match the grant. And so our goal is just to put our money where our mouth is, because we've seen so many organizations not do so. And we don't want to benefit from this unless we're going to bring up the rest of the ecosystem building community with us.
I'd so be banging on your door if you were in my city, because we've got all of that. We can get money, and we've succeeded. And luckily, our local sort of economic development people really like us, and so they tend to make it quite easy for us. That's how things are now. But I don't know, that there may be a change of personnel in a year's time, and that might change. And that's that lumpiness of public funding, apart from anything else, is a nightmare, let alone the bureaucracy. We are literally right now, Joe's just alluded to it, we are looking for a more sustainable source of income, and specifically we're looking for local companies that have made it to be a bit more philanthropic. You know, maybe they've done some mentoring, maybe now they could give us some money. We don't have a huge budget. We can keep the lights on for about £35,000 a year, which is peanuts really. If we could double that, maybe we can do more things. Sam can go full time, which would be nice. But it's in the grand scheme of things, it's a small amount of money compared to how much money cities piss up the wall in stupid white elephant stuff. That, you know, grand things that leave sort of legacy buildings that no fucker uses. That, you know, I mean, it makes me despair. I just stop looking at that stuff now and say, okay, I just need 35,000. Who can I ask nicely? And I mean, we've been doing a whip round with some of our more sort of successful entrepreneurs and say, okay, who's going to cough up a few grand a year? If you were in my city, you'd have had a phone call by now.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing it across. Like, our job requires us to look at tons of different ecosystems across the world, and we see the same things over and over, where it's just like we aren't actually supporting ecosystem builders in the right way. I think, you know, one thing that I would love to get your guys' thought on is that our goal is kind of twofold here. One, to support an ecosystem builder, but two, to pressure other organizations to like actually put their money where their mouth is. And so when you think about that goal, like getting the I don't know, very large foundations who are known for entrepreneurship and ecosystem building to support ecosystem builders in a more meaningful way. How would you all approach thinking about how we can best do that? How can we get other organizations to put their money where their mouth is in terms of supporting ecosystem builders like this?
What a loaded question.
Shame them by doing it yourself first.
Now we look like a small startup can do it. Y'all can do it too.
Exactly.
That I think so. I think that this is an interesting thing because I think there needs to be a conversation about ecosystem building, because I think the term has become conflated into several different issues, and it's become such a mess to talk about because it means something to everybody. So when you think of, say, a university innovation ecosystem is an ecosystem, then you have startup communities, that's an ecosystem. Then you have diversity inclusion initiatives, which are part of the ecosystem. And when you mash them all together, you have a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different agendas, which all don't have the same outcomes. They're all additive, but they're not all the same outcomes. So the conversation lately has become so general that it's almost like support an ecosystem builder is meaningless to everyone and no one at the same time, and take any two ecosystem builders and stick them in a room, you can't even have a conversation about it. So I think there's this challenge globally to actually say, okay, what is ecosystem building? Let's break this up into its all parts and let's actually talk about what this means. And I've always been the one of like, if you want to make a sustainable business model for investing in startup, that's really, really easy. I'll raise a venture fund, which I actually ended up doing like that on the side. It's like, and they're like, well, how are you going to work on issues of equity and access? It's like, sorry, I raised a venture fund. Like, we're going to try, but it's a venture fund. Like, we're going to pick the best startups, we're going to invest in them. So, we're going to, and if they're women and if they're people of color, we'll invest in them. But that's not part of the mission of the fund, unfortunately. That is some of the mission of the work that I'm doing over here. So there's this challenge of all these different pieces in there, and also from the university standpoint, it's support university spin out, supporting university research with diversity and inclusion if you can. So you end up with all these different people with slightly different agendas that want to contribute, but a lot of it ends up being like it's on mission for everyone and exactly on mission for no one. So the challenge of getting everyone to pony up money actually ends up being, what am I putting money into? What am I contributing to in terms of ecosystem? It's fuzzy. And I think that's an important discussion that needs to be had.
I think you've got to be prepared for quite a diverse set of successful behaviors in different cities. And it might be one city's really good at female entrepreneurship and another's really hot on a particular sector. Now you'd like, for a wholesome community, you'd like all of those things to be happening. But the reality is, unless you've got local leadership, none of those things will happen. So if you turn up in a city and they just happen to be really good on a particular business sector, that's still kind of ecosystem building. It might be a bit more niche, but somebody who really cares about that particular niche, whatever it is driving it. And that's just flavors, and it's messy. Like Joe said, it's messy, and not everywhere's perfect, and not everywhere's the same, crucially. And it's kind of like, your different cities will have completely different cultures and completely different business sectors, different attitudes, and you've kind of got to be prepared to have quite a wide definition of what you'd accept for funding. And you might find that you fund one thing in a city, but some of the other things that you like to see just aren't happening there. You kind of have to accept that. You're never going to get somebody who does everything. I mean, I know, for example, my bias is towards software. And if I look at the people in our ecosystem, because I started it, they're mostly software people, and we're now trying to have to learn how to deal with people who are doing more tangible hardware, based in retail and e-commerce and that sort of stuff. So, in a way, sometimes you just got to follow those trends in individual places.
I'm going to build on this. There's a particular, so in our community, we actually had a food sector initiative that came out of a workforce partnership sector strategies group. And the guy who's running it now, Micah, actually ended up creating an industry association where he actually gets all his funding from the industry association, like all of it. And he does, he makes a fairly good salary. In the time that the sector strategies was ending and Micah actually did that, there was this move to fold Micah in under the Chamber of Commerce, which would have given him a stable salary to sort of start this work. And he actually decided not to do that and just strike out on his own. He burnt a couple political bridges by saying, no, I'm not going to go underneath your chamber. I'm actually going to run this industry association under my personal limited liability company, which freaked a lot of economic development people out. But it was very, very effective because all the local food companies are saying, yeah, he'll go lobby for us. So he's doing all the things that the local food companies need. But there was this period about 6 months to 8 months where he was like, if I spin this up and just go start raising money from my own salary direct from these companies, this is kind of a scary thing. And he did it a couple of years. I mean, he's been doing it for 3 years. When it comes to the sustainability, find that unique, like if you could find a unique thing like that, a unique situation where there was someone like Micah in that unique time and place with the unique community, building on what Ben says, where that would really make the difference between someone actually doing it that's actually going to benefit or someone getting sucked into Chamber of Commerce economic development morass. Is there someone who's at that tipping point? Would this money tip them into the role of freedom, or would it send them into the belly of the beast? 5 minutes left.
5 minutes. Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say that. Do we need to do the wrap up thing or about what we think we learned, or can we continue?
Well, so it's up to you. This is for you to give you feedback and give you ideas. So you're 5 minutes, but it is nearing the end.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead, and I want to just like make sure that I've gotten everything that you guys have been saying to me, basically. So what I've gotten from this is that as we're building out this program, we need to be like cognizant of the fact that there are people in this space who are doing this just to be like, hey, I'm really awesome, and who aren't doing it to actually build up a community. And then we also need to be looking at communities that are at a place where this money is going to make them better and get them onto like newer ideas and newer things for their community, and not so much have them just doing the same old kind of a thing. And if we're going to do this, and our goal at the end of it is to look at other, people in the space and be like, hey, we did it, you can do it. We need to be loud about this. We need to be loud about it, and we need to be, going to different meetings and events and things and letting people know what it is that we're doing. So those are my 3 kind of takeaways from this. Paul, would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think also thinking very deeply about that balance between what ecosystem we pick and then what person we pick within it. Kate, one of the points that you made that we didn't get a chance to double click on is also considering non-geographic based ecosystems as well. So I think that will be something that we have to really balance about. Do we limit it to geographies? Do we open it up to all ecosystems, and how we really balance those 2 criteria?
The only 2 things I would jump in there on your recap are like, I just want to emphasize that like what you said is correct, but none of these people are bad people. Like they're not misintentioned. They're all very well intentioned. They're just wrongly incentivized. So like they're all good people. It's just making sure that they have these long-term incentives that prevent them from burning out, that it does generate wealth. That's a good thing, because then that wealth trickles down to the next generation. And that's the only way you really get the ecosystems to grow, is by the creation of wealth long-term. And then on the being loud point, yes. And when you do that, make sure you're loud on the inner workings. So if you gave people equity, be loud about that, right? What they're going to want to do is be loud about the city. They're going to want to say, Baltimore, amazing, Toronto, amazing. But it's like fans at a sports game. Like that doesn't move the ball down the field. Being specific about the offensive play and the intricacies of the game and making all that public so everyone knows how the game is being played, that is what changes mindsets, versus everyone being like, look at this tech hub we built downtown, and like no one really understands how it works, and no one will say they don't understand how it works because no one wants to appear dumb. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So this has been really, really helpful. I think definitely from my just like understanding better like how to really think through this process and think through what this program needs to look like for us. So I really appreciate everyone's time and advice today.
Can I ask a quick question? Both of you are founders of your company, right?
No.
I'm the founder and CEO.
I'm
Okay. Okay, so close to, because that really matters. You've got to be building something you yourself would have appreciated, 10 years ago or whenever. If otherwise you're getting involved in someone else's business, but it's not, you are well aligned to do this. That's what I'm getting at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Joan
you,
James,
guys.
for setting this up.
Thanks
Take
for
care, guys.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.